Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I am Liam, your host, and I am on my own today, but no worries. We are back with the wide receiver end of season review. And last week we had Antonio on the podcast, and he couldn't get the answer to the brain teaser that I left you with at the end of last episode. So let me fill in the blank for you. So the brain teaser was which running back had the highest difference between their points per game rank and their end of season rank. Bonus points if you can guess the correct difference between the two ranks as well. So just like the previous week with quarterbacks, the name that you're trying to guess probably wasn't anywhere near in your mind. So it's Ty Montgomery. If you got that right, congrats. I have no idea how you got that. He had one game all season that he was accounted for, and he scored 10.3 points. That's why his rank difference was like massively different. He finished the season as the running back 35 in points per game and running back 116th in full season scoring. So that's a huge difference. The difference is 81. So if you've got anywhere between 76 and 86, I'll give you the extra bonus point just for some fun there. But wait until the end. I've got another brain teaser, and this one will be easier. I promise. It's a name that you will have heard of. Let's dive right into the top 12 wide receivers. Previous weeks, I've gone over what teams that might be looking at wide receiver changes, like new wide receivers coming in, they're losing wide receivers, I might draft some, but that could be every team. Last off-season proved that we have no idea what's going to happen at wide receiver. Big contracts are going to get signed. Like last season, we saw AJ Brown get moved and sign a massive contract. We saw Hollywood Brown moved during the draft. We saw Terry McLaurin sign a big contract. This year, we could be looking at guys like T. Higgins and CeeDee Lamb signing big contracts, but they're not free agents at the end of the 2023 season, or right now going into free agency. Sorry, they are free agents going into the 2023 season, unless fifth-year options or extensions come about. But what I'm trying to say is wide receiver is such a versatile landscape as it is. There's not a huge amount of guesswork that can go into the wide receiver landscape in 2023. What I will be doing is having a look at some of the top people at the wide receiver position that are going into free agency. And it's a weird one because there's not a lot of big names going into free agency. It's kind of weird. So guys that I'm pulling out of this list, Juju Smith-Schuster is probably the first guy that I kind of think of when I look at the free agency list. He's had a great season so far. And obviously he's still ongoing in the playoffs. He's a guy that I was massively high on in the season. And before the season, his age, and going to a guy like Patrick Mahomes, he had 930 that he played, and that was across the 18-game season. He did miss two, or missed one game, sorry, but he still had a terrific season, in my opinion. Only 3 touchdowns, so that's where he kind of faltered, and he ended as the PPR wide receiver 27. He could be moving on in free agency, and then his teammate as well, Mecole Hardman, he's another guy that could be moving on. I wouldn't put him in my top 10, but he's just a guy that I wanted to mention because at 25, teams are going to be looking at paying up for that speed and hopefully utilizing it a bit more. A guy that flashed a few times during the season, Paris Campbell, is going to free agency as well. These aren't names that are going to fill you with much confidence. It's not like a few years ago when there was a lot of movement through the free agency market. Looking through, Alan Lazard could be moving on. But again, these aren't names that are going to get you excited as a fantasy football player. I'm looking through the list, and I've basically picked apart the top guys that could be moving around. Jacoby Myers, Jarvis Landry as well. But there's not much else. Julio Jones, if you really want to go down that route. But yeah, it's scarce. So I think the wide receivers are going to be moved through trades and in the draft. And that's where we're going to see a lot of movement. Sterling Shepard is one guy that was doing well for the 3 games he played, and then unfortunately got injured during that 3rd game. So moving on, we may as well dive into the top 12 wide receivers. And as usual, I use PPR scoring points per game, top 12. So this isn't season long, and I only use weeks 1 to 17 because they are the most relevant weeks to fantasy football. Most people don't play in week 18. If you play in week 18, I don't know what you're doing. I don't agree with it. You're going to have a lot of players sit during that week, and they're most likely the best players on people's rosters. So you're negatively affecting probably the playoff portions by playing in week 18. So with that being said, I'll quickly race through the top 12 and then we'll dive into a few. So Justin Jefferson ended as the points per game wide receiver 1 and season finish wide receiver 1. Undoubtedly the wide receiver 1. He was the wide receiver 1 in August DLF ADP, and then I'm just looking at. I should have this up. Yeah, in January ADP from DLF, he's also the wide receiver 1. So there's no movement and none expected really. Wide receiver 2 is going to surprise a lot of people, and that is Cooper Kupp. In points per game, because he only played 9 games, he still was the wide receiver 2 because he was just insane. But what I find extremely interesting here is he was the wide receiver 21 in season finish, even though he played 9 games. He still missed, 8 games? And he was still a wide receiver 21. He's still a wide receiver 2. That is nuts. So we're going to see a lot more of the old guard here. So Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 3. Devontae Adams, wide receiver 4. Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 5. And then Jamar Chase and some of the new guys come through. Wide receiver 6, Jamar Chase again played 12 games. So I didn't finish the full season and had a few games out with some injuries there. Finished as wide receiver 16 in season long, but he was still top 6, I suppose, wide receiver 6 in the season through points per game. So when he was on the field, he was incredible. It was just that he wasn't on the field. AJ Brown, wide receiver 7. CD Lamb, wide receiver 8. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a guy that I was very wrong on, wide receiver 9. Deandre Hopkins played only 9 games. He had that suspension, had a few games out with injuries, wide receiver 10. T. Higgins, wide receiver 11. And Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 12. Before we dive into some of the specifics, I want to pose a overall question here. When you look at those names, you have the young guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, CD Lamb, Amon St. Brown, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle. Those are the young guys, right? All of those guys are under 25, apart from AJ Brown, who's 26. Sorry. Everyone else is under 25 in that list going into the 2023 season. They're all 25 or younger at the moment as we speak. Then you've got the old guard, as I called them at the start. You've got Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Deandre Hopkins, all of which the youngest wide receiver going into the 2023 season. It's actually a tie between Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs. Do we need to have a new conversation about the values that we have at wide receiver? Because it seems that at 27, wide receiver value kind of falls off a cliff. It's like the running backs at age 26, 25, 26. It just disappears. There's no more value. For the type of value that you're getting through the points, you can't seem to find that value on the trade market. And it's quite frankly insane to me. If you're contending and you can get one of these guys on your roster for the trade market value, you are laughing because you're getting significantly more points than what you traded away. The thing that I think we're going to see, especially over this off season, is people not selling on players like that, like the younger guys at that value when they hit that 27 mark, like AJ Brown. Do you believe that this time next year, if he keeps up this elite run, this elite way of play that he's got with the Eagles right now, if he keeps that up in the 2023 season and he's turning 27 in the 2024 off season, do you think that his value is going to fall off a cliff? I don't. And I think that's going to be massive in the terms of wide receivers, because we're going to see a lot of change in the way that people value those elite, and I'm only talking about the elite players here. If we look at some of the other older guys, they've got no value. And I'll come on to excuse me, I'll come on to those in a little while. But AJ Brown is a prime example of this. I think that his value is going to be the same in 3 years' time if he keeps up this type of play, this level of play. His value is not going to change. If not, it's going to go up. It's not going to decrease because of his age, and that's the main thing here. Age is going to start to become a bit more irrelevant, and I think we're going to push it to 29 or 30 years old. When I was saying 27 as the drop-off value, I think I'm not just saying let's push it to 28. I think genuinely people are going to see 30, and for these elite players still going to keep paying up for them because they are going to be ridiculous. And I'm talking 4 years down the line at this point, because I'm hoping anyway we have these young guys in our top 12 for a long time, because it'll set up a lot of good dynasty rosters. Let's dive into a few. So, as I said, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1 across the board in August, DLF ADP, January, DLF ADP, season finish, and points per game. I'm not going to go into it much longer. He tore up the season. Absolutely incredible. Tyreek Hill is a guy that has surprised a lot of people. There were not in the off season, people were knocking Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill combined because they didn't know which one was going to pop off. Some had Tyreek Hill higher, some had Jalen Waddle higher. I don't think many people had them high and in amongst the same together, like I and a few others did around wide receiver 4, 5 to 7 or 8. I think that a lot of people kind of had that. I think I had Jalen Waddle around wide receiver 13, so I won't take a lot of credit there. but Tyreek Hill ended up putting a wide receiver 2 season-long finish through the 17 weeks, and points per game, he was a wide receiver 3, even though he was drafted as the wide receiver 10. That is, quite frankly, incredible. I mean, he is only 28, going into this next season as 29, but he's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 6. And as I say this, I'm kind of biting my tongue a little bit because Jalen Waddle is slightly higher. But he's the wide receiver 6 right now. Is this going to be peak value for him? Are we ever going to see him get higher than wide receiver 6? Maybe when we get closer to the season starting and there's no question marks around Tua's future and that's all been confirmed, I think that's the time to sell Tyreek because that's going to be peak value, or even when he's scoring points. I think the biggest thing for him right now is he's a massive hold because he's only going to increase in value as the offseason runs. I think if you don't sell this season, you're going to start regretting that maybe. I'm not saying that he's going to regress. I just don't think that that value is going to hold throughout the entire season. He has another season like he did this year, then kudos to him. And I don't think there's anything I can say about that. But if he doesn't, I don't think he ever returns to this value that he's at or will be at the start of the season, before the season, at the start of the season. Devonta Adams, I think, again, he's a hold. I don't think you can do anything with him. Derek Carr posted that, Devonta Adams, Derek Carr, he was seen posting that Instagram post saying goodbye to Raiders Nation, to I nearly called them Oakland, the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that's causing a lot of concern because we don't know whether the Raiders are going to trade Devonta Adams. I can't see it happening. But if they can get the first and second back that they traded away to Green Bay last year, I can kind of see them doing it. Otherwise, I think Devonta Adams is staying there, and we just don't know what that quarterback situation is. If Devonta Adams gets Tom Brady, I can imagine the hype going insane before the season. He is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 12 at 30 going into next year. I can kind of see why, but I think if you're contending wide receiver 12, you can do a lot worse. Stephon Diggs, he finished as the wide receiver 5 in points per game, wide receiver 4 in season finish, and he was drafted as the wide receiver 5. So about where people expected when they drafted him. He's currently going as wide receiver 7. I don't know whether I agree with this, with where Adams is going. Adams is currently going wide receiver 12, as I said, in January ADP. So why is there such a gap between these two? I don't get it. I personally don't. I understand the quarterback concern, but as long as Devonta Adams has a mediocre quarterback that can get him the ball. I mean, he did it with Jared Stidham. He did it with Derek Carr. He's done it with Aaron Rodgers, obviously. I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers is bad, but I'm just going through his quarterback. He's done it with a plethora of quarterbacks now. Why is there such a gap just because of that uncertainty? Maybe if you think you're a contender going into next year, picking up a vet like Devonta Adams isn't a bad move whatsoever at wide receiver 12 prices. But if you are, you've got to understand that you are probably picking him up at a value you're not going to receive in a year's time. Even if he puts up a wide receiver 1 to 5, an overall wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 5 season, I don't think you're getting the value back that you traded for him this offseason. So he is a buy, but moving back over to Stephon Diggs, we don't know what's going to happen with him. The Bills crashed out of the playoffs this weekend just passed, and there was a lot of frustration there. I think that's all it is, just frustration. I don't think there's much to talk about there. People will try and make it out more than it is, but I don't think it's much there. So I think Stephon Diggs will probably just sit at level playing field as where he was this year. Jamar Chase, kind of already spoken about him. AJ Brown and CD Lamb are both guys I wanted to speak about because both guys are going to want. CD Lamb's going to want a big contract. I believe AJ Brown signed one when he moved to the Eagles, or more accurately, he was traded to the Eagles. I think that it's interesting because CD Lamb is wide receiver 3, AJ Brown is wide receiver 4. I think they're just going to stay where they are. I mean, they haven't really moved. CD Lamb was wide receiver 4 in August, and AJ Brown wide receiver 6. So they kind of are where they are. I don't expect much movement there. I think if Sean Payton comes into Dallas and they get rid of Mike McCarthy, that's going to affect CD Lamb's value a little bit. I think it's going to go up because they're going to see what they did with Michael Thomas, maybe. But I don't know. I don't. I think CD Lamb and AJ Brown are just steady bets at the moment. Amon St. Brown, we're finally on to one of the more controversial guys that I want to speak about. And a lot of people's ears have just peaked because I just said Amon St. Brown is controversial. He was the wide receiver 25 in August ADP. He ended the season as the wide receiver 9 by points per game, or wide receiver 7 in season long. He's currently going as the wide receiver 8 in DLF ADP. I talked to guys that would take him higher than that. I talked to guys that are completely out and don't want to take it. I kind of see both arguments here. I see that people are saying, well, if he's not going to be a wide receiver 1 for you, then when is he ever going to be a wide receiver 1? What does he need to do? And I get that. I get that Amon St. Brown now for 2 years has done incredible things for the Lions. I'm just trying to find his season-long finish for last year. So he was the PPR wide receiver 21 last year, and that was with a fair few games where he basically wasn't used. It was weeks 13 to 18 where he was really used and he scored a lot of his points. And then he carried that on into this year. He had 2 games where he scored 6 points combined, and then the rest of the year, the lowest score he had was 9.95 points. He had an incredible season, but my worry is at the end of the season when Jameson Williams, the rookie wide receiver that tore his ACL towards the end of the college season in 2021, when he started to come back, he was getting a lot of the big plays. He was making big plays. He had a 40-yard jet sweep. He had a 40-yard catch. His first touch was a touchdown, a longish touchdown at that as well. I think there's a lot of things that we need to consider with Amon St. Brown. I can also see the Lions taking another wide receiver, maybe not in the first or second round, but a bit later on. Obviously, Amon Ra was a 4th round pick, and you don't expect many 4th round picks to do what he did. It's extremely rare. There's one that comes up every so often, but it's extremely rare. Doesn't mean to say Amon St. Brown is going to completely disappear from the Lions' game plan. If they were to do that, then they're idiots, because he makes the offense move. He's been the centerpiece of that offense, but at the same time, he has been the center of that offense while Deandre Swift has been injured, while Jamal Williams was just getting touchdown after touchdown. There's nothing else there. There was DJ Chark that was doing bits. There was Josh Reynolds that was there doing bits. I know I'm forgetting someone else, but I can't remember who it is off the top of my head. But that's my concern with Amon St. Brown. And I'm a reserved, risk-averse player in Dynasty. If I were an Amon St. Brown owner, which I am in a single league, I would be selling right now. Wide receiver 8 is ludicrous to me anyway. I say ludicrous, it's not offensive and it's not horrendous. I've got him slightly lower. I've got him around the wide receiver 12 mark. But I really do think that he is at risk of either Jared Goff not being as good because he's had some of the best years of his career in Detroit, but he came crashing down in Los Angeles when he was playing for the Rams after a few years. But you could also see it the other way. I think that Amari has that wide receiver 1 overall upside, and not many players do. That's why I'm kind of stuck on Amari St. Brown. I think where he's going at the moment is a little bit too high, but I do understand why people are taking him there. I'm just personally a little bit lower on him. If I was to try and sell him, I'd trade him 101 for, or I'd trade Amari St. Brown for the 101, i.e., Bijan or Bryce Young, whoever is the 101, or CJ Stroud. After the first, after the NFL draft and landing spots and draft capital have been decided. I think 102, 103, I could see myself going for it, maybe wanting a tiny bit more just to sweeten the deal. 104 onwards, I'm probably asking for more. In fact, I am asking for more. I think Amari St. Brown, you could probably get more than this as well. That's the thing about Amari St. Brown. You could probably get more than the 102, 103. But I'm just thinking where I've got him, where I'd put Bryce Hall or Brees Hall. No, sorry, Brees Young, CJ Stroud, and Bijan Robinson right now in my Dynasty rankings. Moving on to the odd one out in the top 12, and that was DeAndre Hopkins. He was the wide receiver 41 in season finish. He was the wide receiver 44 in August. Yeah, he was the wide receiver 10 in hit points per game. And this is why I like to look at points per game. He's the oldest guy in this list in the top 12. He's going into the season next year as 31. One of 3 over 30s going into next year. So he's on here because there's so many questions about the Arizona Cardinals going into the offseason. We have no idea who the head coach is going to be. The GM, we have no idea whether he's going to be traded because there's talks about him being traded. We have no idea what the offense is going to look like going into next year. I think this is where Marquise Brown could be, or Hollywood Brown, whichever name you're more familiar with. He could be a sneaky buy because if DeAndre Hopkins gets traded, then you're looking at Marquise Brown being a great buy and becomes a great player. He becomes the wide receiver 1 in the offense with his college quarterback. That's why they went out and traded for him. But then the issue comes, Kyler Murray tore his ACL towards the latter part of the season. So they have no quarterback starting the season. We don't know when he's going to get back. And even when he gets back, is he going to be healthy? So you could possibly miss out the entire of the 2023 season with a not 100% coming back from an ACL Kyler Murray. And is that the type of quarterback you want throwing to DeAndre Hopkins? I think DeAndre Hopkins owners, you're hoping for a trade because you don't want Colt McCoy or whoever is going to be backing up there, Trace McSorley, whoever, throwing the ball to D-Hop. You want a competent quarterback, a starting quarterback. Moving on to the last two, T. Higgins and Jalen Waddle. I know I said I only touch on a few, but I've ended up going through the list anyway. These two, wide receiver 9 and wide receiver 11 in August, respectively, basically flipped that for their season-long finishes. Wide receiver 13 for T. Higgins and wide receiver 8 for Jalen Waddle, and yet finished back-to-back in points per game. They currently are going T. Higgins, wide receiver 9. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 5, which is interesting. I think Jalen Waddle, if you were to try and trade him, you probably wouldn't be getting wide receiver 5 price. I personally wouldn't be taking Jalen Waddle there. I've got Tyreek Hill, for example, Stephon Diggs slightly above. We've even got T. Higgins above him. The thing about T. Higgins is he's going to be asking for a contract this season, this off season. That could negatively affect him going into next season. In terms of if he were to get, or his value, should I say? Because if he wasn't to get that contract, because they've got a few other contracts coming up, is he going to stay there? And if he doesn't, is he going to thrive with another quarterback? Because we don't know what he's like without Joe Burrow. That being said, if he doesn't sign a contract this off season, he's going into a contract year, and there's a lot of research out there that contract years are really good for players because, for fantasy purposes at least, because they end up doing better. I mean, look at Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley coming back from injury. Saquon Barkley still got up to stardom. Josh Jacobs playing in a contract year still did really well. Miles Sanders had a better year than usual contract year. I've only picked out a few. It doesn't happen across the board, but it seems like a good bet that if people go into, or players go into a contract year, they might do better going forward. So let's think outside the numbers here, outside the top 12. So the first guy that I wanted to pick up on is Amari Cooper. Matt from the Fancy Wildcard guys, at Matt Dynasty FF, I believe it is. I'm sorry, Matt, if I've got that wrong. He put out a tweet asking about Amari Rodgers and him being super undervalued. And I completely agree with this sentiment. You saw Deshaun Watson come back at the end of the season, not do brilliantly, but Amari Cooper still was the wide receiver 10 overall in season-long scoring. He was the wide receiver 16 in points per game. That's why he wasn't in the top 12. And that was with Jacoby Brissett for most of the season, with Deshaun Watson coming in, trying to figure out the offense, or how to play in the offense. And I don't think enough people have caught on. He was the wide receiver 34 in August. The wide receiver 34, I think that's stealing if you were a contending team, or he probably made your team a contender. The interesting thing is he's still the wide receiver 28. He's still not a top 24 wide receiver. I think that's because there's so many young guys right now that it's kind of pushing the aged guys down, as I mentioned earlier. But he's not lost a step. I think if you're looking to contend, Amari Cooper is a sneaky buy at the start of this season. I don't think a wide receiver being drafted or whatever is going to happen in the off season is going to affect him that much. Even if they bring in the top wide receiver in the free agency market, Juju Smith-Schuster, in my opinion at least, I don't think that's going to change Amari Cooper's finish. I still think he's going to be a wide receiver 12 in season long if he's not injured. So do we need to value Amari Cooper a little bit more? I think so. I think he's genuinely a first round pick. At least he's tradable for a first round pick. I think you could probably get him for an early second, which I think is kind of nuts, especially if a rebuilding team still has him on their roster, or a team that finished, say, draft picks 3 to 7, and you won last year or season just gone. I think you could try and get him for an early second, maybe even a mid second, and someone might take you up on it. If you got a late second, maybe throw in a third and see how it goes. You have no idea whether someone's going to accept that type of offer. And he's going to be cheaper now than he is in 6 months' time when we get to the start of the season. So, sorry, 8 months' time when we get to the start of the season. Next guy, Devonta Smith. I mean, there's not much for me to really mention here. I've got him because he was back to back with Amari Cooper as wide receiver 25. I was pounding the table at the start of the season saying that he is too low. I know AJ Brown came into his house and took over that wide receiver one role, but Devonta Smith proved that he can still be a wide receiver one, and he ended up as the wide receiver 9 in season long, wide receiver 15 in points per game. He had a few big games, had a few small games, and then he was up and down, but he was quite good for your team. I mean, I say quite good. For the wide receiver 15 in points per game, that's pretty good. The thing with him is he's going into his third year now. He'll be demanding a contract next off season. I think the Eagles will pay it because why wouldn't they? His intent is insane. But I know they've got AJ Brown. Can't imagine a reason why they wouldn't pay it unless Hurts falls off a cliff next season for whatever reason. Again, don't see it happening. So Devonta Smith right now is wide receiver 14 in January ADP. I think at that price, he's kind of where he should be. I don't have him in my top 12 personally, but he's around guys I would also have around him. So DK Metcalf, for example, Chris Olave. I think both guys are they're all should be around that mark, and I can't completely agree with the ADP there. Christian Kirk is an interesting one. He was going as the wide receiver 51 in August, and he ended up as a wide receiver 14 in season long, or wide receiver 22, sorry, in points per game. He completely shocked everyone. Myself and Rich laughed at his contract, saying that it was way too much, and I mean way too much. And it ended up being fine. I mean, we saw that the wide receiver market went nuts last off season, primarily with Christian Kirk being the first wide receiver taken off the market and being paid a ludicrous amount. We thought at the time he was made into something, and he was really good in that offense. I think T. Law, if he takes steps, sorry, Trevor Lawrence, if he takes a step forward, Christian Kirk's going to be a part of that. I just don't think he's going to be the whole solution. So I kind of see this as his ceiling. I don't foresee him doing any better than we saw him do this season, or much better, should I say. Just having a look. He had 8 touchdowns, so not too many touchdowns. I had it in my head that he had more touchdowns than that. And touchdowns are pretty sticky. He had a career high in touchdowns, but he had over 1,000 yards, 1,180 yards, and he had 84 receptions on 133 targets, the most that he'd had in his career, of all categories. So yeah, a career year, but I don't know how much I trust Kirk going forward. We've got Calvin Ridley coming back, so do we see Calvin Ridley take some of that offensive production? If Trevor Lawrence doesn't take a step forward, will that negatively impact Christian Kirk? I think so. You've also got the draft coming up, and you could potentially see the Jaguars take a wide receiver. Again, every team can take a wide receiver, so don't put too much into that. But I think Christian Kirk is someone that you need to kind of look out for. Next on my list is actually the opposite. So they didn't do very well this season. Elijah Moore, wide receiver 28 in DLF ADP, ended as the wide receiver 98, the lowest I've got on my show sheet this week. He didn't do very well at all. Season finish was wide receiver 80. We know all the issues around that. wide receiver room around that team in general. The quarterback room is probably the biggest concern there. We have no idea what's going on with the quarterback right now. So I think that makes Elijah Moore very hard to draft. He's currently the wide receiver 48, which I think is kind of sneaky good. What I understand the reluctance to buy, but I think the Jets are going to go out into the free agency market or even the trade market and want to address this quarterback position. They recognize that they've got a great defense and they could be in a Super Bowl window if this defense carries up what they did this year, as well as if they get a quarterback that is sufficient enough. And when I say sufficient enough, I just mean that's passable, that's mediocre. Everything Zach Wilson basically hasn't been. You could have a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo or a guy that Rich thought Derek Carr could move into the New York Jets quarterback room as their starter. I think that's going to be a huge bump for Elijah Moore. My concern is the whole issue around the coaching staff and that relationship. They haven't mended that properly. I don't know where we see Elijah Moore in a year's time. I think it's just very, very difficult to try and predict. But he has great upside to be a huge return on investment if you were to buy him right now. You could probably get him for a late second, maybe even an early third. I would wait until close to the draft to try and get him, but I think that's not a bad buy. Maybe wait until free agency, just before free agency when the hype hasn't started yet. That's probably a time to buy because Elijah Moore, if you are going to buy him, could return huge. He could also be a complete dud and flame out the league. We have no idea. Darnell Mooney is another guy that started the season with we had high hopes for him and they crashed and burned. He did go onto IR and he has been out with a few injuries, so there's not a lot to say with this one. But the reason I put him on the list is how much that Bears offense could change this year. They have they have many picks this year. They also have no wide receivers really. I'm surprised they gave up their second for Chase Claypool. That ended up being the 33rd overall pick, the first pick in the second round. They've got Darnell Mooney, and that's it. They've got no one else. They've drafted Velus Jones that started come on. You've got Equanimeous and Brown, and that's really it. There's nothing else there. So my concern is that they go out in free agency and they try and add someone. But as we saw, or as you heard, there's not a lot in free agency in terms of the wide receiver market. Maybe Juju goes there. That's it. That's the only one that I'm really concerned about for Darnell Mooney. My concern is more the draft, and there's a few good wide receivers in this draft that could be the wide receiver one. We've seen Darnell Mooney be the wide receiver two with Allen Robinson opposite as the wide receiver one and still produce. So maybe it is a good time to buy Darnell Mooney. He's wide receiver 43 in current January ADP. So if you can get him for the same price, again, he's a boom bust kind of play. He could go either way this offseason. I could see him being a wide receiver two. I don't foresee him being a wide receiver one, but he could be a top 24 wide receiver, or he could be as useless to you as this season has been for him. Now, I've got a pair of wide receivers before we get out of here that I wanted to talk about. First off is Courtland Sutton, so therefore you can probably guess the next one. But Courtland Sutton was the wide receiver 21 in August, and he finished as a wide receiver 45, or points per game 47. Was he just a product of a bad offense, or do we see anything else from him for the rest of his career? I think that's the big question, and if you know the answer, obviously you need to try and buy or sell depending on which one it is. He had 109 targets in his 15 games. He didn't really do a huge amount. He still had 900 yards, 800 yards, which is pretty good. But that team and that offense specifically was dysfunctional. So he was a solid wide receiver. His top rank, weekly rank, was wide receiver 16. I mean, when I go to his lowest, it's wide receiver 76 for the games that he did play. But games where he actually scored decent points, he was over 10 points. And obviously that sounds a bit off, but for the start of the season, he was no lower than wide receiver 39. He had 10 points in every single one of those games. Towards the end of the season, in games where he played and did something, he was the wide receiver 37 lowest, and he was around the wide receiver 26 highest. So I think that's kind of what you're going to see from him going forward. I don't think we're ever going to see the Courtland Sutton from 2019, where he was a top 24 wide receiver. I think that you're just going to have to put up with what he is now. If you've got him, you've just got to hold and hope that offense starts doing something going into next year. And if they start doing something, reap the benefits. And I'd say trade him right now. No one wants him. No one's going to pay up for him. So you can't really do anything with him. Jerry Jeudy is the last guy, as you probably guessed when I said I've got a pair. Again, was he a product of a bad offense? He did better than Courtland Sutton at the start of the season. On my record saying that I had prefer to have Sutton over Jeudy because I didn't believe in Jeudy this year. That was obviously wrong. He was the wide receiver 32 in ADP, so ADP agreed with what I said. Season finish was wide receiver 26, and points per game was wide receiver 29. Sorry. So he again is a guy that kind of felt like a product of a bad offense. But what I'm interested to know is how much do you believe in him? Because he's currently going as the wide receiver 30. That is late first, early second territory. I mean, we talked about Amari Cooper, that he's going 2 picks ahead of him. I don't think their trade value is the same, and this is why I was talking about Amari Cooper being a buy. I think Jerry Jeudy, just because of his age, will demand more than Amari Cooper in the trade market. But Jerry Jeudy, if you want to play a game while you're driving a car or having a run, however you listen to this podcast, through weeks 13 to 17, what do you think his rank was? Where do you think he ranked in scoring, both points per game and normal, like during that time, with the exact same rank? So between week 13 and 17, where do you think he ranked? I'll give you a second. Not too long. You've already been able to have a think about it. So it was the wide receiver 9. That's right, wide receiver 9 overall. During a 5-week span, he had incredible numbers. He did have the overall wide receiver 1 week against Kansas City in week 14. He had the wide receiver 15 week in week 16, which I think is definitely something people need to be paying more attention to. But then when we look at week 18 included in that, week 13 to 18, we see him go up to wide receiver 6 in season long and wide receiver 6 in PPR as well. Or I say season long within that span. Flat. And his average over those games was also wide receiver 6 because he had the wide receiver 3 overall week in week 18. I think that he's being severely undervalued, or say severely. I think he's undervalued compared to where he should be based on those weeks. And I'm aware that it's a small sample size, but what's changing in Denver? The head coach, and therefore the offensive scheme. But that's it. Russell Wilson, I think, will have a bounce back year, and he might be undervalued compared to where he should be, or where we kind of expect a bounce back to go. I think coming with that will be Jerry Jeudy. I don't think Courtland Sutton will jump as high as Jerry Jeudy might. And if you're paying an early second, late first for Jerry Jeudy, I think if he makes that jump and keeps up those type of numbers, whereas a wide receiver 2 for a few of those weeks during week 13 and 18, he was also the wide receiver 1 during those weeks. Oh, a wide receiver 1 for some of those weeks. I think Jerry Jeudy is quite an interesting buy, and if I can get him for the 111, 112, I'd do that. 110 is probably where I start to hesitate. I'd probably do it for the 110, 19 on like further down in the draft as earlier than that. I think I'd start to struggle and I'd want a bit more coming back. But those are the type of plays that you kind of want to make. You want to drop down from a guy that you think is too high, ranked too high, to Jerry Jeudy, and pick up some value there and hope that Jerry Jeudy comes up. For example, Christian Kirk. They're going around the same mark right now in ADP. Do you move from a Christian Kirk down to a Jerry Jeudy? Or, sorry, Christian Kirk's wide receiver 33, Jerry Jeudy is wide receiver 30. So Kirk is slightly behind. Would you move Kirk for Jeudy? I think that's an interesting conversation you need to have with yourself. And if it fits your team, I think it could definitely bump up your overall team's value. As we start to get out of here, I'm going to leave you with a brain teaser and a dynasty tip that I've come up with. So my dynasty tip is always stay in touch with the market. So what I mean by that is you always need to be thinking about who could potentially move value in the next few weeks, next month, next 3 months. If you can predict that correctly, you are always going to be ahead of the game and therefore be accumulating value. And that's the whole point of Dynasty. That's the whole fascination with Dynasty. No one can really prove it. So these are the games that you need to try and play. Buy low, sell high. Easier said than done. But these are the bits that you need to be looking at to really pull apart that market. Jerry Jeudy, do you think that he's going to be higher at the end of or this time next year? Do you think he's going to be lower? If you think one or the other, that's where you've got to sell. If you think they're going to stay where they are, I don't think you're going to trade them whatsoever. Jerry Jeudy, I think is buy. My dynasty tip is stay in touch with the market, but I'm still going to pump Jerry Jeudy as a buy right now. The brain teaser for this week is one that I've hinted at during the podcast. So, which wide receiver did I have to exclude from the top 12 wide receivers in points per game because they didn't play enough games? So, a tip, I use minimum 4 games played. So, you have to play 4 games or more. 4 games or more to be included in my top 12. I will point out that I have said his name during this podcast. And I'll go through that again. Which wide receiver did I have to exclude from the top 12 wide receivers in points per game? Again, points per game, and it's PPR. So points per reception. That's the scoring I use. And the reason I excluded them was because they didn't play enough games. I'll leave you with that. And until next week, Rush Nation, I'll see you then. And remember, stay in touch with the market. Bye, guys.